Today was my first breakthrough on this new short story. Um, I've been at it for about a week now, and I finally got a breakthrough. Today was finally that breakthrough session that I needed. It was the first really strong page that I have written so far. I've been meticulous about what I've written before, but this happened to be the strongest thing I've written yet. It's a part of it is the prose, and then the other part of it is the content. I was able to make the story basically a lot richer with just a few details that I had basically not considered before. When I go into these projects, although I tend to outline, I give myself enough room that I can sort of surprise myself. I can throw in my own sort of flavor. The outline is like a little bit of a skeleton, but I leave plenty of room to sort of change things around and substitute things as I go along. It keeps the writing both engaging, but at the same time, it has a certain structure basically so you don't end up actually getting lost kind of along that path. People often will use the analogy of like an outline being like a GPS, like, kind of guide you in your car. The way I outline is a bit more like driving down a once known path, right? Maybe there's like a friend of yours that you haven't seen in like 10 years, and they live in the same house on that same street in that same town, and you can kind of recall how to get there, right? Like the highway, the exit, like what part of town they're on, like the general area. Yeah, you may have to like pause at a certain street to like, check the streets. Maybe there's a weird house, or there's like you know there's a street sign with like some giant like willow tree blocking it, so you can't really read the street sign, but you're pretty sure that's the street, and you get, and maybe you go on the wrong street like once or twice, but you can more or less figure out from memory where the house is, right? That's a much more accurate way to explain how I tend to outline and go into these projects. I give myself a little bit of room. I know for the most part where it's going to be, where it's going to end up, but there's some room to get lost, and in that getting lost, there's room to basically expand a bit. There's room to sort of enrich your tale and go a little bit deeper with that tale. In this case, what made my story a bit richer was simply a bit of a backstory. It was just a little bit of a backstory to sort of why this event is important to the character. Basically, these characters are going into a parade. So it's like an old home day sort of parade here, and basically I went into why the parade mattered. It was like two paragraphs, like two kind of short paragraphs on why it matters, but there was some detail there I had not considered before, and I was able to make it richer because of the details. But more importantly, the details were something that actually came somewhat personal. It's not necessarily my backstory on it at all, basically, but I have family members basically that have a sort of weird connection to these sort of events, and I was able to kind of basically take their backstory, take kind of their motivations for why the parades matter to them, or this particular town's parade matters to them, and I weaved it into the story. I actually added it into the story. What this goes to show is that the key to good writing is knowledge of your subject. When they tell you to write what you know, this is what they're talking about. It's not necessarily you being extremely familiar or have experience in a certain area. If that was the case, Tom Clancy would still be selling insurance or whatever, right? Like Tom Clancy basically, the things he was writing basically with his his military techno kind of thrillers there, right? Obviously he didn't have intimate knowledge working in like the CIA or NSA, or sorry, NSA didn't exist when he wrote those books, but like the CIA and all, like Homeland Security and all that stuff, he obviously was not working at the Pentagon and stuff like that, yet he wrote it. It's being familiar with the subject. And so when you write these stories that you haven't researched, that you're not familiar with, that you have no knowledge of, it becomes very apparent very fast because your writing is so general, because it lacks so many specifics to enrich the tale. It's a reader can pick it up very quickly, and that is what leads to the cliches. That is what leads to very sort of bland and unoriginal work. It's a lack of specifics. You must always, always, always try and go a layer deeper in all of your stories. If it's a story about a chosen one, some chosen hero who has been picked to save the world, it's been done a million times, but they're original because each time it goes deeper. The settings are different. The actual events that take place and the specifics around them are always varied and original, or at least they tend to be, or more original, I suppose, than that, right? You have to always go a layer deeper and a layer more specific. It's interesting, too, when I had graduated my MFA, at the class before me, at their graduation, a professor had basically said that the story that will get you success, the thing that's going to make you stand out, is going to be works that you are intimately familiar with in works that scare you. What he was, I think, referring to was works that have some sort of connection maybe to personal trauma, or some sort of connection to some negative maybe aspect of your life to kind of meet those criteria. And the reason for that is, number one, you're intimately familiar. You know exactly the setting, circumstances. You don't really have to research. You can just go back in your memory and you can know exactly how it felt to experience these events. Every emotion in the moment, emotions leading up to it and afterwards, right? You are so knowledgeable that even spending weeks and months and maybe even years researching the topic could never give you the firsthand experience to write this, as it would if you lived it. And the other half of it, the part that scares you, it's because that's the taboo. Good writing comes from confronting the darkness, from confronting those shadows, from facing those taboos. That is why dark material always comes across as so fascinating to us, right? There's a darkness. There's a part that we don't touch. There are elements of society that we say, it's best if I don't go there. Strong writing pushes us towards that. And when you can combine both the intimate knowledge and know exactly what these sort of taboos feel like, both when you confront them and basically what leads up to them and the fallout of them, when you're so intimately knowledgeable that you have a winning story. I mean, truly, that really, if your prose is good, I mean, that's a potential winner right there, just on paper. And so, with this subject, obviously today, it's not so much that I confronted some sort of taboo with my work. The story, although it's about a parade, the story actually surrounds a very, very, very deep taboo. I mean, the whole collection does. I'm not going to go into what that is. But it's not so much about that. It's about the intimate knowledge. Today, that was about the first half of that. What made it strong was, in this particular section, was just knowing a reason why a character might have such a connection to something as simple and mundane as a local parade, right? It's so simple. People skip these things, right? People just, people show up basically some years just on a whim, like, oh, I guess I'll go, right? It's the most mundane thing, and you couldn't imagine people having a very deep connection, and yet this character does for these very specific reasons, and it feels strong, at least for me. It feels strong. It feels like a very strong justification to hold such an attachment to it. And that's really what the first half of really your goal is in these stories, is to first justify why something matters to your narrator and or your main character, and then delivering the story, right? Then having them going after and seeking it and facing all the hardship and challenge in acquiring it. But you have to justify the reasons first. And that justification, again, comes from being intimately knowledgeable of the subject and of why that would matter to your character. Even if, all this knowledge never comes onto the page, you yourself as an author need to know it. If you don't, the justifications will never ring true. Your readers will never believe it. And your work will always read as very bland and as very general and as very cliche. It is a matter of just knowing things inside and out on this entire spectrum of whatever your project is. Even to the point where, again, you're not going to use all of it. You're not going to even use most of it. Most of whatever you learn about a subject or knowledge, right, you're never going to apply all of it. when you do, they read like Dan Brown novels, right? Where it's just, useless facts and information peppered in around some sort of paint by numbers plot that you can figure out every single time, right? It's never really that engaging. So a lot of your research people will never see, and yet because you've done that, because you're so familiar, it will ring true that you know the subject. The reader will just intuitively figure out that you know your subject, and they will believe you. They will go along with your reader. They will give your reader the benefit of the doubt that they will believe this motivation to be true, and that this motivation is worth them putting the effort to pursue.